Hi everyone, this is Faye here from Twilight Crafts, and this is a short process video showing how I use the Tim Holtz 3D embossing folder. So I first took my Sizzix Big Shot and then ran the 3D pebble embossing folder through the Big Shot. So this is the embossing folder itself. I use some 250 GSM white cardstock, and I just spritz it finely on both sides with water. I find this gives a really deep emboss, and it helps the fibres of the paper really sculpt to the embossing folder. So I've got two different designs here. The technique is exactly the same. You run the embossing folder through the Sizzix Big Shot. And you can see here I didn't use the top plate. Because these 3D embossing folders are quite thick, you often find you don't need that top plate of the Big Shot to run through. So here I'm using some 49 and Market inks, and I'm using a soft ink brush here, and I just start applying the ink in patches in different layers. And because you're brushing really gently over the top of the embossing folder, you're just picking out all those details that have been embossed. So I'm also adding some Distress Oxide here. You can mix and match inks and oxides just to create depth in that texture. So what I find works well with this inking technique is picking out 4 or 5 different tones in those browns. I've actually got Fossil, which is a kind of grey. I've got Off the Rails, which is a black colour ink. And then with this technique, I've applied some ink directly onto the cardstock, but I'm now going back and applying some ink onto the embossing folder, and I'm laying the cardstock back into the embossing folder, and this is then allowing almost like the mortar effect to be stamped inside the embossing folder. So running it back through, and you can see here, because I use that dark grey ink, it's given almost like a 3D shadow effect on the bricks. So here I'm using a smaller ink brush. This just allows me to add a little bit more detail around certain parts of the stones, just to create a bit of a 3D effect. And these little flat-headed ink brushes work really well. So here I'm using a slightly darker brown just to create that shadow. And as you can see, the Off the Rails black ink has been used to run through the embossing folder. So I'm nearly done here. I just spritz it with some water and just lift it off to add a bit of depth. So that's it. I hope you enjoyed the process video. Thanks for watching.